Creating user accounts using automated tools. Creating lots of user accounts is a pain, and I won't kid you, I hate doing it. But when you only have a couple of accounts to create, using Active Directory users and computers, it's fine. But when you have hundreds of accounts that you need to create, there has to be a better way than manually typing out everything. Now, thankfully, there are some useful commands that we could use to take a lot of the hard, boring work out of it. The first command that we'll look at in this video is ldifde. This command enables you to import a text file containing user accounts into Active Directory, as well as exporting your user accounts out to a text file. Then we have csvde, which is pretty similar to ldifde, but this enables you to use a CSV file, like a spreadsheet, instead of a text file to manipulate your accounts. Now, csvde is a little less flexible than ldifde, but it does save a lot of typing, so personally I prefer to use csvde, but once you've used both of them, you're going to make up your own mind. Then we have the good old netuser command. Now, you probably won't use this much anymore, especially when we have the other two commands. This one, it's a little simplistic, but it's still good to pump out a few basic accounts really quickly, so we're going to touch on this command as well. We're also going to talk about how we can redirect our commands so that our accounts that we create are going to automatically be created inside an OU of our choice and not the default users or computers containers, since those containers can't have group policies assigned to them, and as such, they're often less secure than OUs that you might already have created to store your accounts. Now, another thing we can do, although it's not strictly an automation tool as such, is to create a template account which we can use to copy and then quickly create other accounts, and we'll do that inside Active Directory users and computers. And this is a good idea, as you'll see. It enables us to create new accounts very quickly, and most of the relevant account information will already be populated for us. Finally, we have a bunch of directory service or DS commands that we can use to manipulate user accounts, and we'll see how we can put them to use in our network. So the first thing we'll do here is to fire up a command prompt. We'll click on Start and we'll launch a command prompt. And then we're going to change into the scripts directory here. And if I do a quick dir, you'll see that I've got a couple of files in here that I've prepared for this video ahead of time, and we're going to look at those shortly. So to start using ldifde, we'll type in ldifde, and we'll add in a /, and we'll hit enter. And we'll get back a list of all the available options. But the main two that we'll be interested in here is this -I switch to import a file and the -F switch to export a file. However, you probably will find a few of the other switches here useful as well. For example, if we scroll up, you'll see here we have a -S switch, which we can use to specify a different server than the one that we're currently connected to. And here you can see the -D switch, and that'll help us specify a different domain than the one we're currently connected to. All right, well, we'll type in ldifde again, and we'll add in the -F switch to export to a file the user accounts we have in our domain, and then we'll need to add a file name. So let's call mine AD for Active Directory, and we'll add in the .ldf file extension, and we'll hit enter. And we can now see that the users have been exported from our domain controller, which is dco2.winstructorlab.com, to a file called ad.ldf, and it contains 215 entries. So our command completed successfully, and we now should have our ad.ldf file created inside our scripts directory. So we'll go and click on Start, and we'll open up Computer, and we'll go to our C drive, and then the scripts folder. And here you can see the file that's been created. So we'll double click on it, and since it's only a text file with an LDF file extension, I'm going to choose to select a program to open it with, and that program will be Notepad, and we'll click on OK. All right, now let's maximize Notepad here to make things a bit easier to see. And if we go and scroll all the way down near the bottom, you'll note here that we can see Jane Smith's user account that we created in an earlier video. Now, since it was one of the last things we created, I knew that it was going to be near the bottom, as this file will show the most recent items that have been created at the bottom. All right, so there's Jane's user account details. On the first line here, we can see the distinguished name and her common name of Jane Smith. Her account lives inside our Winstructor OU using the domain component of Winstructor Lab and com. And remember that DC in this case means domain component. It doesn't mean domain controller. And you can essentially think of this as a component that makes up the domain. So one of the components of our domain, of course, is Winstructor Lab. The other component is com, and together they form winstructorlab.com. Now, some of the things that you see here in this list are able to be imported and some of them aren't. So if we look down this list, we could see options such as the common name here of Jane Smith, her surname of Smith, and the given name here of Jane. Now, had we have supplied an initial for Jane's middle name, we'd see initials here as well. Now, we could also see when Jane's account here was created and when it was last modified, the display name, her user principal name, and so on. And take note of some of these fields, such as the user account control field here with the value of 512, which indicates a normal user account, as I just want you to keep some of the things here in the back of your mind, as these fields here are what we'll need to define when it comes time for us to import a list of new accounts that we want the ldifde command to create for us. So most of these fields here are able to be imported later on, but some of them that can't be imported are going to be things like the object global ID or the object SID, as these things are unique to specific accounts. Now, another point that I should mention about this file is even though you see all these keywords here down the left-hand side using capitalization, these words aren't case sensitive. So when you start writing your own files to import, you can do it all in lowercase if you like, or all in uppercase. It's up to you. This sort of formatting just makes it a bit easier to read. So now we've seen what an export of user accounts using ldifde looks like and the fields that are available for us to use. Let's go and import some user accounts. And would you believe it, the file that I'm looking for is not there, so it's on my C drive here. So let's just drop that into my scripts directory, and we'll open up our file here I've called auto.ldf, and we'll expand this. Okay, so in this file here, we have a bunch of different user accounts that we're going to try and create, and some of them are going to be created inside a London OU, and others are going to be created inside our New York OU. Now, both of these OUs, of course, we created in an earlier video. So the first thing we'll need to do up here is to supply a distinguished name, and we'll reference that with DN followed by a colon. Then we'll need a common name, and in this example here, we've called this common name Fred. Then we'll need to define where Fred's user account will be created, so we're going to add it to our London OU. And since London is a child of the Winstructor OU, we'll need to specify that as well. And the last part here is to specify the domain component of Winstructor Lab and the domain component of com. Now, I know I always harp on about this, but remember that domain component here doesn't mean domain controller, it means domain component. Now, because I'm creating a user here, I need to specify the object class of user. And finally, the last mandatory thing that we'll need to make this work is a SAM account name. So here we have a SAM account name of Fred. Now, this SAM account name is the pre-Windows 2000 logon name, whereas on the next line here, I've specified a user principal name as well, of Fred at winstructorlab.com. Now, by default though, even if we don't specify this line here with the user principal name, Fred here will still be able to log on using his UPN of Fred at winstructorlab.com, even though it won't actually appear to exist in his user account properties. So for these first two entries here, we've also added in a couple of other optional items, and you'll notice that all of the other entries here consist of the 3 mandatory lines only. So if you were to copy these 3 lines here into your own text file and just substitute the domain components and OUs and of course the usernames for your own values, then that'll work just fine. Everything else that you see is optional. So the last line I want to point out here is this entry here, user account control with the value of 512. You see, by default, all of the user accounts that we create, with the exception of these first two, are going to be disabled, because to enable an account using LDIFDE, we'll need to provide this user account control line. Now, depending on whose documentation you read, it'll probably tell you that you'll need to enter in the value of 512 to create a normal account, which, quite frankly, doesn't work. Now, it's not that all the information out there is just flat out wrong. It's just wrong in the sense that it won't work by default, since this violates the default domain policy. Now, I'll also point out that if you actually do want to create a disabled account, you could change this value of 512 to 514, or you could just leave it out altogether, as the default is to create a disabled account anyway. So I'll tell you up front that this file as it stands is going to produce an error whether you're running it on a Windows 2003 server or a Windows 2008 server like we're running here. But let's go and run it anyway, and you'll see what I mean. So let's go back to our command prompt, and we'll enter in LDIFDE with the -I switch because we want to import a file, and then the -F switch, and then we'll need to provide the path to the file that we want to import. But since my file here is in my current directory, I just need to supply the file name, and we'll hit enter. And as expected, we've bombed out on the first entry. Now the output here tells us that we're unable to update the password, the value provided for the new password doesn't meet the length or the complexity requirements. But hang on, we didn't supply a password, did we? Well, no we didn't, and since one was expected, there's part of the problem. So the problem here with our first two accounts is that the new user account doesn't comply with our default domain security policy that requires a minimum of 7 characters in our passwords, and since our password was 0 characters, since it was blank, when we imported the file, it's going to produce the error that you just saw. So back in our text file here, if we change this value of 512 to 544, what this is going to do is mark this password field as being not required, something that I probably wouldn't recommend doing on lots of accounts that you plan on importing. But nonetheless, this is what we'll need to do in order to get around this problem. All right, well, let's click File and Save, and we'll go back to our command prompt, and we'll try again. All right, this time it works without errors. So if we go and launch Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we'll expand our domain, our Winstructor OU, and then select our London OU. You can see in here that we've got a bunch of new user accounts, most of which are disabled, except for Barry and Fred's account. So let's find out why it didn't work properly in the first place when we ran this command with the user account control value of 512. Alright, so here we have a brief summary of all the options that you have with the user account control field. And you'll note that we've got a lot of options down the left-hand side, and we've got hexadecimal and decimal values down the right. And you'll probably recognize some of these property flags since they're found on the properties of a user account, like account disable, the home directory, and whether a password is required for this account, and so forth. Now, if we look down to the normal account line, we can see that a normal account has the decimal value of 512. So when we tried to create Fred and Barry's account, we attempted to create a normal account by referencing the value of 512, and that was then subsequently blocked by our default domain policy. You'll probably note, however, that if you run through this list, that I said we'd need to change the value to 544, but I can tell you now there isn't a value of 544 in this list. So to arrive at the value of 544, we just simply added the options together. So what we did here was to create a normal account which has the value of 512, and then we added the password not required value of 32. Now, and this comes to a total of 544. So for Barry and Fred's accounts, we effectively said, create a normal user account, but don't ask for a password since it's not required for these accounts. Now, if you think back to our earlier video on user accounts, you'll also recall that setting local user properties will override what's configured at the default domain security policy, and that in effect is what we've done here. So remember that if you plan on using LDIFDE to create a lot of user accounts that you want to be enabled immediately, you'll need to set the appropriate options in the user account control field of the imported LDF file. But that said, who really wants to create a whole lot of user accounts without a password? So from a security perspective, I'd recommend running this without the user account control line altogether, and then creating disabled accounts, and then you can assign a password to them manually, since as it stands, both Fred and Barry here will be able to log on without a password. Although, they will be asked to change it when they first log on, but since anyone could do that, it's pretty insecure. Okay, so let's move on to our next option for automating user account creation, and that's using the csvde command. So if we go to our scripts folder here, I have a CSV file that I created earlier, so we can show you the difference between the text file we used in LDFDE and the CSV file that we'll use in CSVDE. Now, you should take note here that the file has been saved as a CSV file, a comma-separated value file, so make sure when you create one of these, you do a save as and save the file as a CSV file, or you're going to have problems with the formatting. Now, as it stands, if we open this file up using Notepad, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see here, since in a text file like this, the columns won't line up correctly. So let's go and view this same file on another machine I have here in my network that's running Microsoft Excel. So I'm just going to use Remote Desktop, I think, to connect to this machine. And we'll click Connect. And I'll type in my password here. Okay, so here you can see the same file opened up in Excel, and at least we've got the benefit of proper formatting here so you can see the columns. Now, across the top row here, you can see we have the headings Distinguished Name, Object Class, SAM Account Name, User Account Control, and User Principal Name. So for our Distinguished Name here, we'll be creating 10 user accounts called User 01 all the way down through to User 10. We'll be creating these in the London OU, which, as we learned earlier, is the child of the Winstructor OU, and then we've specified the domain components here of Winstructor Lab and Com. Now we can see here that the object class is a user account, the SAM account name is the pre-Windows 2000 logon name, and we've specified User 01 down to User 10. We've also set the user account control value to 544 to create a normal account that doesn't require password, and then finally here we've set the UPN for each account. Now, I personally prefer to use this method of automating user accounts over LDFDE, since I can now use the autofill tool in Excel, and that'll save me a lot of typing. Now, one thing you might have noticed here that on the fourth line, we haven't included a SAM account name for user 3, since I wanted to show you what the result would be if we leave this field out. Okay, well, let's go back to our local Windows 2008 machine, and we'll go to our command prompt and we'll import our users.csv file. So we'll type in csvde and we'll add in the -i switch to import a file, and then the -f switch, followed by the file name, which in our case is users.csv. And as a side note, you can use a -k switch to ignore any errors, and that's a good idea if you're merging a lot of accounts into your Active Directory, because you don't want it to create half of your accounts and then bomb out because of an error. Okay, so we've entered in our command, so we'll hit enter and we'll see what happens. Good, well, our command completed successfully, and there are a total here of 10 entries successfully modified. So we'll go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we'll refresh our London OU. And there's the 10 accounts that we've just created. And of course, you can see here that all of these accounts are enabled because we added the value of 544 in the user account name property column. So let's take a look at any of these accounts. We'll right click on them and choose Properties, followed by the Account tab. And we can see that there's their user principal name and their pre-Windows 2000 SAM account name. And you'll also note down here that this user will need to change their password at next logon. Now, if you recall, we also deliberately left out the SAM account name property for user 03, and that's supposedly a mandatory field. So let's go and take a look at this user's account properties, and we'll go to our Account tab, Now with this account, we can see that they have their UPN of user03@winstructorlab.com, but take a look here at their pre-Windows 2000 SAM account name. When you don't fill in this information and you create user accounts using CSVDE, Windows is going to generate a random 20-character pre-Windows 2000 name for this account. So that right there is a pretty good incentive to fill this information in properly, because if you want your users to be able to log in using their pre-Windows 2000 name, they're going to have to remember this 20 characters. Or you, the administrator, are going to have to go back into all of these accounts and then enter in the information correctly. So there's a little gotcha to think about when you're creating your CSV file. Okay, so we've looked at the CSVDE command, and I think it's better to use CSVDE since you're able to save so much time typing, since a little bit of creative Excel work can do most of it for you. But basically, CSVDE and LDIFDE do the same thing, so play around with both options in your lab and then use whichever one you prefer. Okay, well let's move on and we'll take a look at the old NetUser command. Back many versions of Windows Server ago, before all of these nice shiny new tools were available, the old NetUser command was pretty popular as it allowed you to script creating user accounts. So fast forward to today, and it still allows you to create user accounts one at a time or by batch file, but it's pretty limited with what it can do, especially in comparison to some of our other options, including those that we've already looked at with LDIFDE and CSVDE. In fact, you can only add a new user account with the NetUser command. You can't assign the user many options at all. So this is just a quick and dirty way of creating a new user account only without all the frills. Now, if you do want to go and check out what other options you have with the NetUser command, if you go to your Start menu and choose Help and Support, and then come over here to the right-hand side and choose Command Reference. This is going to take you off to a Microsoft TechNet site here, and we'll choose A to Z list. And then we can scroll down until we find our net command. There's our NetUser command. And on this page, you're going to find all of the available options you have with this command. All right, so to use our NetUser command, we're going to just close this down. We'll go back to our command prompt, and then we'll type in NetUser, followed by the /add switch, and then you type in the name of the user. Now, you can actually write this around the other way as well if you like. You could enter in NetUser, followed by the name of the account that you want to add, and then add the /add switch at the end. It's up to you. NetUser won't judge you either way. So we'll add in a new user called Richard using our NetUser command. So we'll enter in the name of Richard, and then we'll need to give Richard a password. So let's type in password, remembering that we still need to meet the complexity requirements. So I've just made sure that I have an uppercase P, a special character, and some lowercase characters in this password. Now we'll hit enter. And Richard's account was created successfully. So if we go to Active Directory Users and Computers, and then our Users OU, here we can see Richard's account. Now, by the way, even though we can use special characters for our password, if I go back to my command prompt here, and we'll rerun the same command again, but let's just go and change Richard to Richie. Now, if we go back here to his password and we'll change it to include a different special character, the pipe symbol on the end of his password, and then hit enter, you can see that we've got a message back saying that the syntax of our command is incorrect. But looking back over the password, we could see an uppercase character with some lowercase ones, and then, of course, a couple of special characters. The problem, though, with this password is that Windows interprets this pipe symbol in a different way and it can't read it properly. So if you really want to use this pipe symbol, we'll need to enclose this in quotation marks and then hit enter. And this time, the command works without a problem. Now, this command is also going to have trouble with a couple of other special characters, namely the greater than and less than symbols. It's going to have a problem with the caret, the ampersand, and of course, our pipe symbol. So if you happen to use any of those in your password, just be sure that you add the quotation marks and that'll avoid any errors. But if in doubt, you could become accustomed to using quotes all the time and you'll never have to worry about it again. Now, before we finish up with our NetUser command, you can use the net user command within a batch file to create more than one account if you like. So let's go to our scripts directory. And here I've created this simple batch file here, which we can use to knock out a few quick user accounts. So all we'll need to do is run this batch file and watch as the accounts are being created. Now you might also note here that I've mixed and matched a few of the things that we've discussed here. So here at the top we're using the net user command followed by the /add switch. But in our last two lines here, we're using the net user command and we've put /add at the end. Like I said, it doesn't matter which one you use, both will work fine. Now at the end of the script here, we've added a pause statement, which will just pause our script at the end, and it's going to display a press any key to continue type message. And this just enables us to review the output here to see if there were any errors in our script. So we'll go back to our command prompt, and we'll run our script user.bat, and we'll hit enter. All right, it's done. So we'll now go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we'll refresh our screen here. And we can see all the accounts that have been created. Now, when we create accounts like this using our net user command, the new account will not have a user principal name. So let's select one of the accounts. Andy's one of the ones we created. So we'll choose properties and then the account tab. And you'll notice here that there is no UPN for Andy's account. Yet you will find though that this account can still log on using a UPN name of andy@winstructorlab.com. Now, of course, you can fill in this information if you want to do that manually, but that's optional as the account will still work with either a UPN or the pre-Windows 2000 name. Now, another thing I do want to touch on before we wrap up this section is that when you use the net user command, you don't have any control over where the accounts are created. All of the accounts, by default, they'll be created inside the user's OU. And if you happen to use the net computer command, for example, those computer accounts you create, they'll also be created in the default computers container. Now, the problem with this is that both the computers container and the users container are really only that. They're big, dumb containers where you can store these accounts. So the issue at hand here, though, is that none of these two folders can have group policy objects assigned to them. They'll only be governed by the default domain policy and nothing else. So if you're the sort of person that's put a lot of time and effort into creating your group policy objects to lock down user activities and secure your network, you're going to find that all these newly created accounts are going straight into a container that doesn't have a directly assigned policy. So we've got two options here. Either you can manually move each account into the OU where you want it to be, or we can redirect our user and computer account creation, for that matter, to a new OU of our choice. So let's go back to our command prompt here, and we're going to use a redirection command to redirect the creation of user accounts and computer accounts to a specific OU rather than those default containers. So we'll enter in redir user or USR, followed by the name of the OU, which would like to be the default place where new accounts will be created. So let's make, say, our London OU the default place. So we're going to add in OU equals London. And since our London OU is a child of the Winstructor OU, we're going to need to add in OU equals Winstructor. And finally, the domain component of Winstructor Lab and the domain component of com. Okay, double checking that we've spelled it correctly, we'll hit enter. And we can see redirection was successful. Now if we go and run the net user command again, and this time let's change Richie to, say, Terry, and we'll hit enter. And we'll go back to Active Directory users and computers, and then our London OU, and we'll refresh this. And there's Terry's account already put in the right place. But do be aware, though, that you can obviously only have one default OU. So if we wanted to have our accounts added to a different OU, such as New York, we'd need to either manually pick up Terry's account and move it to the New York OU, or we'd need to reissue our redirection command and set it to New York first. Now, as a side note, you can also redirect the computer accounts using the redir cmp command in exactly the same way. So let's just go and issue our original command here again, and I'm just going to change redir user to redir cmp, and we'll hit enter, and it was successful. So now what we'll do is we'll run net computer, and we'll add in a computer account. Let's just call it new comp, and we'll give the add switch and hit enter. Now we'll go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we will refresh this. And right there is the new computer account created in our default location instead of the old computers container. However, if you do want to revert back to the old settings, you can, and we'll go back to our command prompt to do that. And we'll reissue our same command again, but we'll just go and delete a couple of these items here. We'll just change to cn equals users, and then we'll hit enter. And things are now back the way they were before the change. Although I would recommend that you do change the default location for reasons that we've already mentioned. Okay, so that's the net user command. So let's move on and we'll take a look at another bunch of Active Directory command line tools. The first command here is dsadd, which we'll use to add objects to Active Directory. We'll use dsmod to modify objects in Active Directory. dsget displays information about objects in Active Directory, and dsquery, which is a rather cool command, this one. This command is used to query Active Directory objects that are going to match a certain criteria. Now dsmove will move objects from one container to another. And lastly, we have dsrm, which is used to remove objects or the complete subtree of objects from Active Directory. So the first command that we're going to look at is dsadd. So we'll type in dsadd, and we'll follow that up with a /, just so you can have a good look at the help page. And if you scroll up here, you can see there's a lot of options you have with the dsadd command. All right, so in this example, we want to use dsadd to add in a new user account. But before we do that, let's start from scratch and we'll add in a new OU, and then we'll create a group, and then we'll place the user account in as a member of that group. So at our command line here, we're going to type in dsadd, and we'll type in dsadd OU for OU, and let's say we'll call this new OU Melbourne. So we'll need to add OU equals Melbourne, and then we'll need to add in the domain component of Winstructor Lab and the domain component of com. Now, if we hit enter here, this command is going to create the new Melbourne OU, but it's going to place it at the root. So let's change this slightly so that it creates the new OU under our Winstructor OU. So we're going to add in here OU equals Winstructor and a comma. And that's now going to be better since it's going to live in the right spot alongside our London and New York OUs. So we'll hit enter, and we can see that the command completed successfully. So we'll go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we'll select our Winstructor OU here, and we'll refresh it. And there's our new Melbourne OU created in the right spot. Okay, well, let's go back to our command prompt, and we'll create a group inside our new Melbourne OU. Now, rather than retyping out everything, I'm just going to modify the line we used last. So we're going to change this to dsadd group. And let's call this name sales. So we'll give it a common name of sales with a capital S. And then we're going to create this inside our Melbourne OU. So everything else is the same. So we'll hit enter. And our command completed successfully. So if we go back to Active Directory users and computers and into our Melbourne OU, there we can see our new sales global security group. Okay, so let's go back to our command prompt again, and this time we're going to use dsadd to add in a user account. So first, what we'll do is we'll create a standard user account with no options. So we'll go and modify our command again, and we'll type in dsadd user, followed by a name for this user. Let's call him Joe. And so we're going to create Joe's account inside our Melbourne OU, which lives inside the Winstructor OU in the winstructorlab.com domain. So we'll hit enter, and that's completed successfully. And let's go and create another account. This time we'll do it with a few more options so we can see what the difference will be. Okay, so in this example, we're going to use DSAdd to add in a new user called Jake into the Melbourne OU, which is inside our Winstructor OU in our winstructorlab.com domain. Now down here, we're using the -pwd or password switch to assign Jake's account a password, and that's his password right there. And then we're adding in the member of switch, and we've entered in the path here to our sales group, which of course again is in our Melbourne OU and our Winstructor OU and in the winstructorlab.com domain. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new user called Jake. We're going to add him to our sales group and give him this password. And of course, everything's going to be created inside our Melbourne OU. So we'll hit enter. And our command was successful. So let's go back to Active Directory users and computers and we'll refresh our Melbourne OU. And there we can see Joe's account and Jake's account. Now instantly you probably noticed that Joe's account is disabled because we didn't supply a password, but you can see that Jake's account is enabled since we did of course configure Jake's account with a password. So let's right click firstly on Joe's account and we'll choose properties. And firstly on the account tab, you'll notice down here that he doesn't have to change his password when he first logs on. And this is the default setting with the DSAdd command, but we can change that and I'll show you how to do it in a moment. Now, with some of the other automation commands that we've looked at, this box here will be checked by default, but with DSAdd, the box is not checked whether we specify a password or not. So if we go and cancel this, and let's right click on Jake's account and choose properties, then the account tab, you can see down here that also Jake doesn't have to change his password, yet we did actually assign Jake a password. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how we can configure this so users will be forced to change their passwords when they first log on. Now, the other setting that we configured Jake's account here with is on the Member Of tab. And in here, you can see that Jake is now a member of the sales group. So not only can we use DSAdd to create accounts, we could also use it to easily configure group memberships as well. So let's go back to our command prompt. And we'll rerun our last command here, but I'm going to go and change the front of it. So we'll change Jake to another user. We'll call him Ted. And then we'll go to the front of our command here, and I'm going to add in another switch, which we're going to call must change password. And we'll set that to yes, and we'll hit enter. And that command succeeded successfully. So we'll go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we'll refresh this here. And there's our new user account, Ted. So we'll right click on him and choose properties, then the account tab. And down here under our account options, Ted's account now requires him to change his password when he first logs on. And obviously that's a much better choice. Now, since DSAdd is a relatively easy command to use, and the online help explains all of the additional parameters pretty well, so I'm not going to bore you with every single option we have, but there is one particular thing that I want to point out. The home directory and the profile path switches don't work. Now, this was a problem in Windows Server 2003, and it's still here in Windows Server 2008. So back in our command prompt here, if we type in DSAdd user with a /? and we'll hit enter, if we scroll up a little bit here, and notice up here that it tells us that we can use this HMDIR parameter to add in a home directory for a user account. Now, it also says up here that the special token $username$ can be used, and that'll be substituted for the user's SAM account name, which of course, as we know, is their username. Now, what happens here when we actually use this feature as Microsoft suggests is that it interprets the command as a literal, and every user you create using these switches here is going to have a path of $username$ and not their name as we'd expect. Now, there's really two solutions here. Whether you've left the home directory or profile path parameters in or out, the first solution is to go into each account and update it manually. The second solution is to use the dsmod command to modify each account once it's been created. Strangely, the dsmod command works fine and it's going to solve the problem, but DSAdd doesn't. So let's see what I mean. what we'll do is we'll go and create another account here. And let's scroll over to the left and let's give this guy a new name. We'll call him John. And we're going to place him in the same location as all of our other accounts here. But this time, we're going to add a home directory to John's account. So after our password section here, I'm going to add in the HMDIR parameter, our home directory parameter, and I'm going to set it to DCO2/home, and then we'll enter in what Microsoft tells us to, which is $username $. All right, now we'll hit enter. And the command completed successfully, so let's go to Active Directory Users and Computers, and we'll refresh this. There's John's account, so let's right-click and choose Properties, and then the Profile tab. And down here you can see that the home directory is DCO2/home/$username $, which of course won't work. This $username $, should say John, but unfortunately it still references $username $. So let's go back to our command prompt and we'll fire up our next command, which is dsmod. Now the syntax for dsmod is pretty much identical with what we've seen with dsadd. So we're going to dsmod our user account, and that user account is going to be John. And of course, John's account lives inside our Melbourne OU, which lives inside the Winstructor OU. And of course, the domain component we'll need to enter in here is Winstructor Lab and the domain component of com. And then we'll add in the home directory parameter, and we're going to change that to DCO2/home/$username $. All right, so what we've really done here is to modify John's user account with exactly the same settings that we created it with. So in effect, nothing's really changed here. But let's hit enter and we'll see what happens. Our command succeeded, so let's go back to Active Directory Users and Computers. And we're going to go and right click on John's account and we'll choose Properties, then the Profile tab. And now you can see that the home directory path is DCO2/home/John, which is now correct, and unlike our first attempt, this is going to work just fine. Now, I was a little bit surprised when I found out that Windows 2008 still has this same issue, and truth be told, it's not a big thing really, and I'm sure Microsoft have more important problems to solve than this. But just be aware of this gotcha with the dsadd command, and remember that to overcome this problem, you'll need to use dsmod to modify the properties of the account. Now, even though most of the other directory service or DS commands aren't really just isolated to user accounts, let's take a quick look at a couple of the other options we have. The next command in the DS series we'll look at is the dsget command. And this is useful as it enables you to retrieve the properties of a particular object inside Active Directory. So, for example, let's try and find out what home directory John's user account has been set to, so we could type in dsget user. In fact, I'm going to be a bit lazy here and I'm going to do this on the last command just to save me a bit of typing. All right, so we'll do dsget followed by user, and then all the other information should be correct here. We're looking for John, who's in the Melbourne OU, which is in the Winstructor OU, in our winstructorlab.com domain. So we'll hit enter. And my apologies, I forgot to actually add in the home directory switch on the end there, so that didn't quite tell us much. We'll hit enter again. This time we can see that John's home directory is in DCO2/home/John. All right, now this is a pretty good command to know, since it can help you find out a lot of the information about objects inside your domain. Of course, only if you entered them incorrectly. All right, well, moving on, the next DS command that we'll take a look at is dsquery. Now, this command would be one of my favorites since it enables you to search for a list of objects that match a certain criteria. Then using the pipe symbol, you can push the output of this command as the input of, say, a dsmod command. And this means you can modify a whole bunch of objects with a single command. So let's go and take a look at an example first. So we're going to use our same command here, and we'll just type in ds query. And we're going to query the Melbourne OU. And I've done it again, so we're going to go back to the front of our command. We're going to query our Melbourne OU for user accounts. We'll hit enter. And you can see it tells us here that we've got 4 accounts inside our Melbourne OU. Now, let's say that we want all of these accounts to be part of a new group. And let's call this group marketing. So let's quickly go and create a new group, and we'll use the ds add command. So we'll type ds add group. And we'll create the group, and we're going to call this one marketing. And where should we create this group? Let's create it again inside our Melbourne OU, which is inside our Winstructor OU, which of course belongs in our winstructorlab.com domain. So we're going to hit enter. Thankfully, I spelt that one correctly. So now that we have a marketing group, let's run our same ds query command that we ran before, which of course is going to tell us what users we have inside our Melbourne OU. Then we're going to use the pipe symbol to pipe the output of this command into another command. So we're going to take a list of all of the user accounts we find inside our Melbourne OU, and we're going to pipe it into the dsmod command. So we'll modify our marketing group, and of course we are going to need to define the path to that, which is inside our Melbourne OU, which of course is inside our Winstructor OU, which lives inside our Winstructor Lab domain. Now the final thing we'll need to do is add in a remaining switch here, which is going to be add member. And what we're now saying here with this entire command is go and fetch a list of all of the users inside the Melbourne OU. When you have that information, take each one of them and add them to the marketing group. So we'll hit enter, and we can see it's done. So let's go back to Active Directory, and we'll refresh our Melbourne OU. And in here, you can see we've now got our marketing group. So we'll right click on that, and we'll choose Properties, and then the Members tab. And there's all of our users right there. They're now members of the marketing group. Now, I should mention that this command hasn't affected any of these users' other group memberships. If they were members of other groups, such as the sales group, they'll still be members of those groups. Using this command simply just added them to another group as well. So you can see the flexibility of using a query to find objects, then using the pipe symbol to push a query as an input string to the dsmod or even the dsmove command, which we'll go and look at now. Now, dsmove is a really great tool if you want to quickly take an object, let's say a user, and move it from one OU to another one. So let's say that our user, John, we created earlier, has now moved overseas. He's no longer working in the Melbourne office, and he's gone to London. We can use dsmove to take his user account and move it to the London OU. So we'll type dsmove, and we'll use, obviously, John in this case. And we're going to need to enter in the path to where we can find his account, which of course is in our Melbourne OU, which lives in our Winstructor OU. And of course, that's part of our winstructorlab.com domain. Okay, now we've defined the path to John's user account. Next, we'll need to specify the OU, which is going to be the new parent of John's account. So we're going to add in the new parent switch and follow that up with the path to his new home, which of course is going to be inside our London OU, which lives inside our Winstructor OU. And of course, we're going to follow this up with our Winstructor Lab, if I spell that correctly, winstructorlab.com domain. All right, well, we'll hit enter. And now when we go back to Active Directory users and computers, and we'll refresh our Melbourne OU, John's account is now gone. So if we go and select our London OU, there we can see John's account has been moved. Now another cool feature is that we could even use dsmove to make changes to an object when we move it. So I'm manually going to take John's account and I'm going to drop it back inside our Melbourne OU here, since that's going to save me a little bit of typing. And then I'm going to go back to my command line here and we'll just modify, after I clear the screen, our previous command. Okay, so at the end of our command here, I'm going to add in a new name parameter, and let's call this account James Brown. All right, now we'll hit enter. We'll go back to Active Directory, Users and Computers, and I'm going to refresh my London OU. And now John's account has not only been moved from our Melbourne OU, it's also been renamed to the name of James Brown. So there's an example where we could use dsmove to take an object and move it from one location to another, and then modify that object along the way. All right, well, the last ds command that we're going to look at here is dsrm, which, as you might have guessed, is used to remove objects from Active Directory. Now, the syntax again is very similar to the rest of our ds commands. Now, I'm just going to modify the last command that we run, just to save me having to type out a lot of this information. And we'll go to the front here and we'll type in dsrm, followed by the account of James Brown. And of course, he doesn't live in Melbourne anymore, he lives in London. Okay, so we'll run this command and we'll be asked, are we sure we want to delete James? So we'll say yes, that we do. Okay, that's succeeded. So we'll go back to Active Directory Users and Computers, and of course there's James's account. But if we go and refresh this, you can see that the account is no longer there. Now we can also use dsrm to remove other objects from Active Directory as well, using exactly the same method as we've seen, and that can include things like groups and OUs. But one option you might find useful is the ability to remove everything from an OU, but to keep the OU itself intact. So let's go back to our command prompt here, and let's just clear the screen, and we'll use dsrm to remove everything from our Melbourne OU. So we're going to run dsrm again, but this time we're going to use the subtree parameter, which is used to include the object and all objects beneath it for deletion. Then we're going to specify the exclude parameter, which allows us to exclude the current object. And finally, we're going to add in a -c switch, which tells the command to continue even if we happen to get errors. Now, if you don't include this -c parameter, the command is going to exit immediately if it encounters any errors, so it's probably worth throwing that in. Now we'll add in the path to our Melbourne OU, and that of course lives, I think you know this by now, inside our Winstructor OU, which of course is in our winstructorlab.com domain. Okay, well, we'll hit enter. Are we sure we want to delete all children of Melbourne? Well, we'll say yes, and we'll hit enter again, and that's succeeded. So we'll go back to Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we'll refresh our Melbourne OU, and everything's gone. Now, by the way, if we did want to remove the entire Melbourne OU, we can simply go back to our command prompt here, and I'm going to rerun the same command, and I'm just going to take out our exclude switch, and we'll run it again. We'll say yes, and now we'll go back and we'll go to our Winstructor OU and we'll refresh that, and Melbourne has been wiped off the map. Now that also raises an interesting point. By default, OUs in Active Directory under Windows 2008, they're protected from deletion. So if we go and right click on one of our OUs here, let's choose New York, we'll right click, choose delete, and sure, let's delete it. Well, we're told that we don't have permission. Now, even though I'm logged on right now using an administrator's account, it doesn't matter. I don't have permission. Now, if we just dismiss this message here and we'll go up to our View menu and select Advanced Features, and then we'll expand our Winstructor domain again and right-click on our New York OU and choose Properties, and then the Object tab, we can now uncheck this box, and then we'll be able to delete the OU. But from the dsrm command, we don't need to go and uncheck this box. It doesn't care if the OU is protected or not. It's just going to go ahead and delete the OU anyway. So make sure that you are aware of this difference. All right, now, Before we wrap up this discussion of the DS commands, as a final note, if you don't want a confirmation message asking, are you sure you want to do this, type yes or no type thing, then you can include the no prompt switch. But do be aware though, the DSRM command is just going to go ahead and remove the object if you are using the no prompt switch, so just be sure this is what you want to do. Alright, so as you've seen, there's a lot of command line power in the DS utilities, and I thoroughly recommend you practice these commands on a domain controller in your lab, as they're really useful tools to know. Now the final thing I want to cover in this video is using a template account. Whilst this isn't strictly an automation tool, using a template account allows us to quickly copy an account that we've already created, and then we've got most of the work done for us. So let's go back to Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we'll go into our Winstructor OU here. And we're going to right click and just create a new user account. Now we're going to ignore the first and last name fields here, and we're going to go straight to the full name field. And we're going to give this account a name. And look, it really doesn't matter what you call it since it's only a template account. So I'm just going to call mine template. But if you go and add an underscore to the front of the name, this does have the advantage of making sure that this account is going to appear first in the list of your accounts. Now in my small lab here, that's really not that important, but when you have thousands of accounts, it can make it difficult to find it. So having it always at the front is a good idea. Okay, now I'm just going to copy our template word here, and I'm going to make my user logon name and pre-Windows 2000 names the same. We'll click next. Now we'll need to give this account a generic password, and we'll do that again. And we'll leave the other defaults as they are, and we'll click next, and then finish. Okay, now that we've created our template account, which of course does appear at the top of Active Directory Users and Computers, we'll right click on it, and then choose Properties. Okay, now thanks to my pause button and some really fast typing, I've populated some of the standardized fields here, and these are things like our office or our web page, or perhaps on our telephones, I've put in a generic fax there, on our organization, our company name, on the address I've filled in some information here as well. Okay, so now that we have our template account, if we go and right click on it, we can choose Copy. And of course this starts up our new user account wizard, so I'm going to give this guy a name of Jim, and we'll make his user logon name and UPN the same. We'll click next. We'll give him a password. We'll type it in again to confirm it. And then we'll click next and then finish. Okay, now that we've added Jim's account, we'll right click on Jim, we'll choose Properties, and we'll click through some of our other tabs here, like our Address tab. And down here you can see that this account already has these fields populated for us, and that's going to save us a lot of time when we need to add in new users. Now with regards to things like this, the address or perhaps the company fields, we could quite easily create a template account for our London users and another for our New York users, and so on. And that way, all of this information will be correct when you want to create a user in different locations. So if you aren't using template accounts in your company, I'd suggest creating one, since it will only take a couple of minutes, but it's going to save you a lot of work later on. In this video, we've talked about how we can make our lives easier by using a variety of tools and methods to create a whole bunch of user accounts automatically. We've seen how we can use LDIFDE and CSVDE to take a text file or a CSV file and import these accounts into Active Directory. We also saw how we can use the directory service commands to manipulate users, groups, OUs, and even things like group memberships as well. Finally, we talked about the advantages